Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, designing basements where kids can play and relax. Information at callmosby.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio.
I'm Kate Grumke in for Elaine Cha. An invasive species of tick is making its way to our area. Scientists recently found a longhorned tick in St. Louis County, and they suspect we'll see more to come. Solny Adalsteinsson, a senior scientist at Washington University's Tyson Research Center, joins us today. Solny, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kate. It's great to be here.
Solny, an undergraduate researcher in your lab, Sam Coe, discovered the longhorned tick. Before that, there were only 5 other confirmed reports of the tick in Missouri, all in rural areas. What's notable about the discovery of an invasive longhorned tick here in the St. Louis region?
Yeah, well, we've been waiting for this tick to show up for years now, just watching how quickly it's been spreading across the eastern half of the U.S. So we kind of always figured it was just a matter of time, but it had only popped up in a few places around Missouri so far. And so finding it in St. Louis County was notable. We already have a large tick population here, and we've been doing a lot of research on our native ticks, but discovering this invasive one is concerning, not only because of the many unknowns that come along with it, which I'll be happy to dive into more, but also because, we're in a very populated area. And so a large population of longhorn ticks here could also not only pose risks for animal health, but especially human health in the region.
We'd like to invite you to join the conversation. Have you had a run-in with a tick so far this year or in recent years? What questions do you have about ticks in our region? Call us at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. Or email us at talk@stlpr.org. Solny, tell us about the longhorn tick species. What's special about it?
So it is a highly successful invader. It's native to Eastern Asia, but prior to reaching the U.S., it's already been known as an invasive species in Australia and New Zealand. And it was first discovered here in 2017, although it seems it was probably here a little before that. And it has just spread really rapidly. One of the key things about its spread is that it actually doesn't need to mate in order to reproduce. It's what scientists call parthenogenetic. And so just a single female tick can seed an entirely new population. She lays hundreds to thousands of eggs. And then if all of those survive, you can just imagine how quickly that population can grow. And so it can reach really high population densities where it does occur. And so it poses a threat. Especially, some of the most well-documented threats so far have been to livestock, but we're still trying to understand all of its potential for impacts on human and animal health beyond livestock, to include other domesticated species and also wildlife.
And can you give us some tips for telling the difference if someone were to see one of these ticks? Does it actually have long horns, or what does it look like?
Yeah, so, you'd really need a microscope to be able to tell it apart. They're kind of a light brown color and quite small. So we're talking, the size of a sesame seed or even smaller, depending on which stage, whether it's an immature tick or an adult tick. And so just, looking at it with the naked eye is pretty difficult, if you haven't looked at a lot of ticks, to really know what you're looking at. So we're doing a lot of tick collections and really scrutinizing those under the scope. And so they're actually, the longhorns refer to these mouth parts on the tick that kind of have horn-like structures on them. But you need to be able to see it really up close to discern those.
And what about behavior-wise or any other features? How does it compare to the other ticks that are in our region?
Yeah, so one of the similarities with other ticks in the region is that it seems to be able to parasitize a wide range of different host species. And so what I mean by that is it can be found on anything from, people to pets to livestock to birds, deer. They're somewhat indiscriminate in which hosts they'll feed on. And that's also what makes it potentially risky. And because it's our native ticks like the Lone Star tick or the dog tick or the black-legged tick that also have those generalist habits, which make them a good vector to move these bacteria and viruses that can cause disease between people and animals.
Yeah, and that's a good time to talk about why ticks are so uniquely dangerous for human health. Can you walk through that for us?
Yeah, so ticks are, in the US, they're the main disease-causing vector species that we have to worry about. They transmit a number of different bacteria, protozoa, which are just microscopic parasites, and viruses to humans that can cause disease. There's also a condition that's related to tick bites called alpha-gal syndrome, which can cause a sensitivity to red meat and other animal products. And so some of these pathogens can really cause serious impacts on people, and not all of those conditions even have treatment. So some of the bacterial diseases can be treated with antibiotics, but there are more recently described viruses that we're still learning a lot about and currently don't have much treatment options available for people.
And besides for people, what are some of the negative things that ticks can bring for ecosystems and for plants and animals?
Yeah, so this is a big active area of research. Ticks are, the same way that they can cause disease in people, they can cause disease in animals. They can also be a threat to animals through just blood loss alone when they reach really high population densities. And depending on how they affect different animal species, those can have impact, like more indirect impacts on the rest of the ecosystem and kind of throw things out of whack.
Your lab received a grant to study the spread of this invasive species and its impact on other tick disease systems, and that work will begin this spring. What are you hoping to learn more about?
Yeah, that's right. So we received an internal seed grant. So Washington University is supporting us on these efforts. And so we're trying to learn a few things. One is just basically understanding where the longhorn tick is in our region, and then how it's interacting with other ticks in the environment. Is it competing with other ticks for hosts? Are they sharing pathogens? Then we want to really look within the longhorn ticks to learn more about their microbial communities and their associations with these different microbes, which can then impact the survival and reproduction of the ticks. And also, some of those microbes are pathogens that cause disease. And then as part of this, I should mention this is really collaborative work. So I'm an ecologist, and I am fortunate to work with folks that have more of the expertise on the molecular and pathogen side of things. And so in collaboration with those folks, in particular, Jaco Boone at the WashU Medical School, we're going to be looking also at whether the longhorn ticks can transmit bourbon virus through both field and lab studies.
And what do you expect to find? Do you have any hypotheses already?
Yeah, we have quite a few different working hypotheses. One of the things we're really interested to know more about is we already have these really abundant populations of Lone Star ticks in the region. And folks might be familiar with those because they're one of our most commonly encountered ticks. They are responsible for transmitting bourbon virus and heartland virus. And, longhorn ticks in the region for sure would encounter them and may even feed right next to them on a host, which would increase the likelihood that they could share some of those microbes or even transmit viruses between tick species. And so that's one of the things we're really trying to dive into more and understand, what's the potential of this new tick to spread diseases that are already in circulation. And so, we think the longhorn tick probably will be able to transmit these viruses. There have been some lab studies showing that the longhorn tick is capable of transmitting heartland virus. That hasn't been documented in the field yet. And then similarly, with bourbon virus, which is, another potentially serious human health threat, that has been found in a field-collected longhorn tick in Virginia. It's still unclear in the lab how efficient that the longhorn ticks may be at transmitting bourbon virus, but just finding it in a field-collected tick means they're definitely getting exposed to it, and they might have the potential to transmit it as well.
We're talking about ticks and tick-borne diseases with Solny Adalsteinsson. Solny is a senior scientist at Washington University's Tyson Research Center. Solny, if our listeners like enjoying time in the woods, out in nature, what can we do to protect ourselves from ticks?
Yeah, there are plenty of fairly straightforward methods to employ. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want folks to be discouraged from enjoying the outdoors because of ticks. We just recommend that folks take good personal protection measures. So those include covering up, especially your legs, and even in the warm seasons where it can be very hot, wearing long pants, long socks, closed-toed shoes. That's super important. And you really want to create as much of a barrier as possible so that you have the tick has to crawl in your clothing for longer and gives you more time to detect it. And so wearing light colored clothing also helps with detecting ticks. And then you can treat clothes and exposed skin with appropriate products. If you're able to treat clothes and gear in advance, permethrin works really well because it actually kills ticks on contact. It's just important to note that you can't apply permethrin directly to your skin. So always, of course, follow the product labels. Some other things you can do are, if you're out hiking, try to avoid brushing up against vegetation because that's where ticks are hanging out, trying to find a host to grab onto. So staying in the middle of the trail can help. And then check yourself really frequently. So while you're outside, look your clothes over and just, visually scan your body for ticks. And then when you come back indoors, make sure you do a really thorough tick check of your body. They can be hiding out in all kinds of places. So check yourself thoroughly. And if you happen to find a tick attached and already feeding, we recommend just removing it with fine-tip tweezers if possible. And then really cleaning the bite site with soap and water to disinfect the area. And even if you were outside yesterday, it's still good to check today, just to be really vigilant when you've been outside to make sure that you're keeping an eye on yourself.
And if you were bit, what should people look out for to know if they might have gotten some kind of disease?
Yeah, so a lot of tick-borne diseases have sort of a vague suite of symptoms that are almost flu-like. So we're talking about things like fever, fatigue, body aches. Certain tick-borne diseases present with a rash or even nausea or vomiting. So those are the kind of things to look out for. Then I also encourage people to monitor the site where they were bitten. Certain tick-borne diseases will create a rash right around the bite site too. So make sure keep making a note of where the tick was attached so that you can keep an eye on the right place too.
And your research involves going out and looking for ticks. And I'm curious, do the ticks find you? Do you get a lot of tick bites yourself when you're doing that work?
I definitely see a lot of ticks in the course of my work, and we'll find them on my clothing. We take safety really seriously for our crew, so we are always treating all of our gear with permethrin, and we do a lot of team tick checks as well. So there'll be a lot of moments when we're out in the field and people are calling out, oh, tick on your elbow or tick on your knee, and kind of taking care of each other that way.
It'd be great to have one of your team members along for a hike to be able to look out like that. So you recently had a paper published about bourbon virus, which you mentioned. Could you tell us what you found in that study?
Yeah, so that study was another big collaborative study and interdisciplinary. It involved virologists from the WashU Medical School, veterinarians from the St. Louis Zoo, and other folks at Tyson Research Center. And so in that study, we were comparing tick populations and also looking for wildlife exposure to bourbon virus at 2 different sites in the St. Louis region, at Tyson Research Center in St. Louis County, near Eureka, and then at the St. Louis Zoo Wild Care Park up in Spanish Lake. And we're trying to get a sense of just how much circulation of bourbon virus is happening locally and what species may be involved in the transmission cycle or at least exposed to this virus. And so we found that wildlife at Tyson Research Center have pretty high exposure rates to bourbon virus. We're talking, 80-90% of the animals we were looking at had antibodies to bourbon virus, meaning they had been exposed at some point in their lifetime. While animals at St. Louis Zoo's Wild Care Park had no antibodies to bourbon virus. And then to sort of fill out that story, there's also a huge difference in the tick populations at both sites. So Tyson Research Center has a very abundant tick population. We hardly found any ticks at Wild Care Park. So that kind of backs up what we're seeing about the local bourbon virus circulation. And then our study also added to the list of animals that have been found with antibodies to bourbon virus. We still don't know which species are actually involved in transmitting the virus, like potentially infecting ticks. But this kind of fills out a broader picture of which species are exposed in this area where the virus is known to be circulating. And sort of related to that, in particular, white-tailed deer and raccoons had very high, what we call seroprevalence, or just, the proportion of animals that had antibodies to bourbon virus was pretty high. And that suggests to us that those could be good, sentinel species that we can focus on to monitor them. If we get samples from white-tailed deer and raccoons, that can give us an idea of where bourbon virus is circulating and at what levels.
And I understand that there is a way that people can get involved in this effort to understand ticks in the region. So how can people do that?
Yeah, so I should point out this is not my project, but I'm happy to be out here promoting it. The St. Louis County's Vector-Borne Disease Prevention Program has started a new community science project that they're calling Tick Watch STL. And so they're asking residents and anyone in St. Louis County to either mail them ticks or they can bring them to drop boxes at a variety of county parks in the region. And then they're going to be publishing that data in an online dashboard so people can see which tick species were found where, and hopefully down the road, which pathogens were detected in those ticks.
And do you literally just put a tick in an envelope, or how do you mail a tick?
Yeah, somewhat, pretty much. There are some instructions on their website. So if you, I don't have the website in front of me, but if you Google Tick Watch STL, you'll find it. And they have a data sheet that they're asking folks to fill out with more specifics about where the tick was found. And then I believe just putting it in a Ziploc bag or a small envelope will be just fine.
Solny Adalsteinsson is a senior scientist at Washington University's Tyson Research Center. Solny, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.